Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned in to Sustainability Summit 2021. I hope you have been visiting our virtual exhibition with all our exhibitors and engaging with them. Remember, I did say the more you visit, the more prizes you get to win. Hopefully, you'll be lucky. Please also check our social media platforms, SAS Week 21. That is hashtag SAS Week 21 on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I did promise that you need to tie your seatbelt because it's going to get a bit hefty and heavy. And so we're getting into a panel discussion that is much important and much needed in terms of its appreciation. Food, you know that we can't do without food. That's why we gain weight, we lose weight. But the sustainability of food is what matters the most, because things have changed with climate change affecting agriculture and all other value chains. It's a critical discussion to have. So now we are entering a panel discussion on sustainable food security. And this is led by SYNGENTA as one of our sponsors. And our facilitator for this panel discussion is Mr. Adrianos Gianu, who is the Public Affairs Manager at Euroactive. Adrianos, over to you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. And hello, everybody. Welcome again to the second day of the 2021 Sustainability Summit. And this first session that will focus on agriculture. This is the first session of the Sustainable Food Security Seminar. Please accept our apologies for the slightly late start. My name is Andrianos Gianu. I'm the Senior Public Affairs Manager with Euroactive. Euroactive is an independent pan-European policy media organization. I'm joining you today from our newsroom in the heart of the European Quarter in Brussels. I'll be your moderator for this panel, looking at sustainable food production. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm very happy to be here for a second year. A special thank you goes out to the organizers, and we're also very much grateful to SYNGENTA for making this panel possible. Some housekeeping first. I will start the session by introducing our esteemed panelists, and I will ask them for an introductory statement of 7 minutes on our session's topic. Then I will follow up with a round of questions before taking questions from the audience. Please make sure to submit your questions through the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. We will end with short concluding remarks from our speakers, and we're aiming for 1 o'clock finish sharp. If you're posting about this on social media, which we encourage you to do, please use the hashtag SUSWeek21, that's SUS Week 21. Before I give the floor to our speakers, I would like to set the overall framework of this discussion. I would like to start by highlighting how timely this conversation is. The UN Food Systems Summit will take place in New York tomorrow. The new UN Food Systems Summit is part of the Decade of Action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The starkest of realizations, though, is that the world is not on track to achieve zero hunger. Zero hunger is the second Sustainable Development Goal by 2030. We're far from it, actually. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, in this year's annual flagship report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, emphasized the fact that up to 811 million people in the world faced hunger in 2020. That is 161 million more than in 2019. Healthy diets are out of reach for around 3 billion people. Global food security is being tested by climate change, land scarcity, and population growth, to name just a few of the challenges that we face. These include the ongoing COVID-19 health crisis, and I quote from the FAO's report: "The pandemic continues to expose weaknesses in our food systems, which threaten the lives and livelihoods of people around the world, particularly the most vulnerable, those living in fragile contexts." Our food systems definitely are at the crossroads. I'm fully aware that we use this expression all too often. We always seem to be at a critical juncture, but the numbers above confirm how precarious the situation is. Tomorrow's UN Food Systems Summit will focus on food systems transformation. And I would like to pause here for a moment to define the focus of the discussion in those terms. Transformation. How can we transform food systems in Africa? How can we achieve more sustainable and healthy food systems? We're happy to be bringing different actors from the food value chain and look at the innovations and policy environment needed for that transformation to take place. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Jerome Barbaron. Jerome is the head of crop protection for Africa and the Middle East at SYNGENTA and the president of the industry association CropLife Africa and Middle East. He was previously head of the Europe, Africa, Middle East seeds business and global hybrid cereals at SYNGENTA. Jerome, very good to have you. I would like to draw upon your international expertise and ask you to provide some global context to the discussion as part of your introductory remarks. How do you see the future of sustainable food and food security in the world and in Africa? Thank you.
Well, great. Can you hear me well, Leonos?
Yeah? Absolutely, yes, yes.
Fantastic. So, first of all, it's a pleasure to be discussing sustainable development with you all today. It's a timely discussion, as you said, given the UN Food Systems Summit taking place tomorrow, where we expect bold actions to be announced and launched. But first of all, let me start with a quote from Kofi Annan, former United Nations Secretary General, who famously said, "It is time to change the way we think. Farmers are not the cause of Africa's poverty, they are a potential solution. They are key to creating the future envisioned by the Sustainable Development Goals." And I could not agree more, being a sort of a farmer myself and grandson, married to the daughter of a farmer. Farming and agriculture is close to my heart, and I know personally the link between development and the opportunities agriculture can bring around prosperity and more healthy future. And I believe everyone should have the chance I've had and we have had. So first of all, agriculture, can deliver sustainable and inclusive growth for all. And at SYNGENTA, we are innovating and providing technologies needed to help achieve that. We are also working with partners in the food value chain to achieve impact at scale. Nobody can create an impact on their own. No organization, no single company, because there are a range of challenges that our food systems face, ranging from climatic changes and climatic shocks, evolving pest pressures, increasing demand, given the development of the economies around the world and growing global populations. So innovations can help us overcome the challenges of today and tomorrow. As you know, you may know, we are equipping farmers with tools they need to grow more and more sustainably, even when faced with droughts or soil degradation. We help with innovations, we help build resilient food systems against existing shocks and future shocks. They help build resilience in the food systems at an early stage, starting with high quality seeds and seed treatments to enhance and protect plant root health. Also crop protection, as you mentioned, that increase the resilience of crops to pests, diseases, and climatic shocks. We also help protect against post-harvest losses by helping protect the quantity and the quality of grains and food as it is stored, and in doing so, extend the length of time that they can be stored and traded. So through our technologies, we empower farms of all sizes, by the way, including smallholders. Let me give 2 or 3 examples, and then I'll address the bigger picture. We have a seed care fungicide technology called Vibrance that offers unique rooting power benefit. We have won many awards with that in the past 8 to 10 years, and we keep investing. This is a technology that helps increase the capacity of the roots to extract the water and nutrients that the plant needs, even in soils that are a bit depleted and poorer, right? And this is really important for the future. As you know, healthy roots mean better crop, right? Another example would be the coating solutions we have developed around our high quality seeds with specific inoculant that help capture nitrogen from the air, capture and fix some of the soil, some of it in the soil for healthier plants and sustainable yield increases. By the way, this one happens to be an organic innovation. So by providing an organic innovation, coating a plant seed with live bacteria, we can leverage the power of nature and increase gross production value. Third example, and I stop here, would be some of the seed traits we have developed that are better able to withstand above and below ground pressures. We have registered recently, a few weeks ago, our improved maize seed trait technology in South Africa. This will really help farmers access high quality maize seeds, better able to resist devastation of some highly infectious pests like fall armyworm, the African stem borer, common woodworm. So these pests, can destroy 10% to 100% of the entire crop. So this is a massive help. These examples are also examples of sustainable technologies, right? Because sustainability is also around producing more without using more water and land, right? So that helps in return reduce agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions by enabling, for instance, low-till or no-till practices, preserving the soil, and help keep, of course, carbon in the soil. As you may know, there is already today more carbon residing in soil than in the atmosphere and all plant life combined, right? So preserving soil is key when we talk about sustainability. We are also providing innovative services to help farmers become more resilient to the impact of climatic change and climate shock. In South Africa, again, for example, we have a service called AgriClimb that provides cash back to farmers and help them manage the risk of adverse weather conditions during the growing season. And this is a key concern for the farmers. Conscious of time, I'll probably speed up a bit. These technologies are a key pillar for a more regenerative approach to agriculture, right? We have to develop more sustainable farming practices, and that's where we are committed to with our partners. We keep training farmers on good agronomic practices and correct use of our innovation. In Africa, since 2013, SYNGENTA has been able to train more than 4 million farmers on how to better use in a more sustainable way our technologies. With our partners Signia project in South Africa that we are rolling out with Intelligro and Farmers Agricare, we've been training farmers on the safe use of crop protection, and we keep doing it. More than 1,500 farm workers in the past year, and we keep doing it, right? But we're also partnering with wider societal impact in our food systems. We are proud to be part of the School Food and Nutrition Gardens initiative in South Africa and supporting 25 school gardens and around 11,000 learners. So many initiatives. Let me talk about the bigger environment, because sustainable innovations can only deliver impact in a sustainable way and at scale if complemented with the right enabling policy environment. From policymakers, we are seeing a focus on inputs, like how much, what quantity, how much fertilizer is used, rather than outputs, like how much carbon is emitted, right? I firmly believe we need an output and a result-focused discussion and policy framework to achieve sustainable development at the necessary scale. It's also a timely discussion, by the way, given the upcoming European Union Africa Summit that's going to take place in the coming few months. The EU policies, as you know, are based on impact assessment carried out in the EU member states. But the realities in Africa are very different. I mean, climatic conditions, pest pressures, level of food insecurity, or the use of crop protection per hectare, they are not comparable. So it's important that before the EU pushed any policy recommendations towards Africa, it actually does an impact assessment on how these policies would impact Africa. I mean, Africa cannot be worse off afterwards, right? We need to be careful. The farmers in Africa need to produce more for Africa and more sustainably. Let me give an example from something I read recently. A study conducted by TGMO Institute of Agricultural Policy and Development in Egerton University in Kenya that estimates that the ban of pesticides not authorized in the EU would affect 8 crops in Kenya, 8 crops that contribute 16% 0.1% of the country's gross domestic product, right? So the agricultural production would fall by 15 to 20% of GDP. And Kenya would lose 3/4 of coffee production, for instance, more than 40% of the maize harvested last year. So in conclusion, let us use science and innovation to accelerate our path to achieving sustainable development. We need to partner for impact in the food value chain, but we also need policymakers to create the enabling policy environment. I firmly believe it.
Thanks very much, Jerome. Many points raised here. Definitely innovation coming from industry, but the right policy environment needed. Differences between the EU and Africa. We'll get back to all those issues very soon. But next, I would like to welcome our next speaker, Lulama Dibongo Traub. Lulama is a technical chair of the Regional Network of Agricultural Policy Research Institutes, also known as RENAPRI. RENAPRI recently launched the Africa Agriculture Status Report, where they touch upon the issue of building resilient and sustainable food systems in Africa. Lulama, we would very much like to hear more from you when it comes to the Africa Agriculture Status Report. What are some trends and solutions that you have identified? Very good to have you here today.
Great. Thank you, Adrianos. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yes, we hear you fine.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where in the world you're tuning in from. I'd really like to thank SYNGENTA and the summit organizers for inviting me to join in on this very important conversation around sustainable food security issues. Now, in preparing for this talk, what really caught my attention was the session's tagline, and I quote, "The global food security challenge is straightforward. By 2050, the world must feed 2 billion more people." What I thought was ironic is that this took me back to 1798, when Thomas Malthus, the British cleric and economist, predicted that population growth was going to outstrip agricultural production. And eventually, nations were going to fall into what they call the Malthusian trap of war, poverty, and depopulation. And it's ironic that we're standing here in 2021 at the start of what the UN Food Systems Summit is calling the Decade of Action. And we're faced with a similar challenge as Malthus, but with this added caveat or pressure of climate change, right? And so for me, the challenge then really is, how do we build food systems that are resilient and sustainable in order to feed the 2 billion more people by 2050? Now, this is a tall ask, but how do you eat an elephant? Well, we do it one bite at a time. And where do we start? But for me, I think we start at the farm, right? We start with the soil. I think that's important. So now to your question, Adrianos, what are some of the trends and solutions we identified in the African Agricultural Status Report 2021? And this is an agro report, but me as RENAPRI, I served as the technical co-director on this report. Well, there are many key messages that are coming out of this report, because we took a system-wide approach. Here we were addressing the question of how to build resilient and sustainable African food systems over the next decade, right? So we looked at the entire system. But if I had to focus in on one key message, again, for me, it starts on the farm, right? At the primary agricultural level. So in this report, what we did is we noted that as a region, Sub-Saharan Africa has registered the most rapid rate of agricultural production growth since 2000 of any region in the world, right? Our output expanded by 4.3% per year in real terms. The world average over that same period was 2.7% per year. So in the report, we note that this is a win for the continent. But here's the flip side to that coin. 75% of agriculture production growth in the region that reflects rapid expansion in cropped area, only 25% from yield growth. So taking us back to the theme of the session, sustainable food security. In this next decade, as a continent, if we're going to achieve sustainable food security, we're going to need to transition from resource-dependent to productivity-led agricultural growth. In short, we need to increase farm productivity on existing land. The status quo is both not sustainable, both environmentally and socially. So going forward, how do we navigate this transition from resource-dependent to productivity-led growth? What's going to be our pathways? Well, will we as a continent follow agroecology principles, or do we lean into modern green revolution technologies? Well, in the ASSR 21 report, we conclude that for Africa, it's not an either-or approach. In fact, this is a false dilemma. As a continent, we can do it both ways, right? So improved seed varieties generated by modern technologies are absolutely essential for sustainable food systems in Africa. So is increased use of inorganic fertilizer. But equally important is increased usage of organic inputs, composts, manures, cover crops, as well as integrated soil fertility management practices. That's why I was very excited to hear from Jerome that Syngenta is developing these sustainable technologies. It's exciting news to hear. So for a continent, for us to achieve the balance between these two approaches, we're going to absolutely require developing locally adaptive technologies and innovations that are going to be context specific, climate smart, and can facilitate the adoption of sustainable improved practices. So to truly then to make this a local endeavor is going to require that our national governments increase their public spending on agricultural research, development, and extension services. Now, I know that this is not a new message, and it's one that I've just recently been talking quite a bit about lately, but it's a message that bears repeating, this message of public investments in RD&E, right? Because let's go back to Malthus, right? And his dire prediction of population growth outstripping food production. What Malthus didn't account for was the Industrial Revolution and its associated technologies, right? So will this fourth Industrial Revolution with its e-commerce and blockchain technologies embed resilience and sustainability in Africa's food systems in the coming decades? The only way we're going to know is if we invest in Africa's capacity to develop innovative solutions in response to tipping points in the ever-changing landscape of the continent. So those are my interventions. Thanks for the question, Adriana.
Thank you, Lana, and thank you for sticking to the time. Transformation focused on productivity, local solutions, local context, locally adaptive technologies. Thank you very much for that and for touching upon the potential role of the government. Up next is Dr. Abongile Balarani. Abongile is the CEO and General Manager responsible for the egg organization under the South African Poultry Association umbrella. He's responsible for several programs, but not limited to statutory levies, growth of the egg industry, transformation issues as prescribed by the National Agricultural Marketing Council transformation guidelines, and ensuring stable relationships between the government and the industry. Abongile, what about the role of trade in achieving sustainable food security? Africa currently spends billions of food imports. This is surely not sustainable from a carbon footprint point of view, not to mention that those billions are not ending up in the pockets of African farmers. So I would very much welcome your introductory remarks on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra, and the colleagues. Good afternoon. Abongile here. From Lunama, you've mentioned quite a number of good, points where you indicate everything actually starts at a primary level of agriculture. And before I answer your question, Andrea, in my introduction, probably let's start to understand, the landscape of agriculture in South Africa and the region or Africa at large. Now, if you look at the agricultural sector alone in Africa, it is one of the largest employers, accounting for about close to 40% of the total employment, with about 17.2% of the continental's GDP, making it an important sector for most of the African countries. Now, again, if you look at the issues of trade in South Africa, in the region, there's quite a lot of policy ambiguity that still needs to be addressed. Movement of goods from one country to another is still much of a challenge. There's issues of infrastructure and its own issues of access to financial institutions in most of these African countries. So within the continental, trade, we've also seen over some time or over the past decade that there's been an increase in terms of exports of food within the region and the imports of foods from outside, even Africa. Although that has contributed positively in most of the GDPs of these countries, the imports and exports of commodities. But what's very interesting is if you zoom into South Africa, for instance, looking at the agricultural sector of South Africa, we speak of a dualistic agricultural economy where you've got sort of two systems that exist, which is the commercial farming system and the other one, which is the smallholder subsistence farming. Now, if you flip that and you look into the region, Africa on its own, most of the African countries survive on smallholder farmers themselves. You don't have like a dualistic nature, so which makes us very, very unique as South Africa in terms of our agricultural sector throughout the region. Now, another issue now, when you come to South Africa or look into or zoom into South Africa in terms of technology adoption, when we realized some years ago that the population growth is actually going to surpass, the production of food, we adopted the GM sort of farming practices. We produce about more than 80% of our maize on GM. And that allows us to sort of cater for our growing population. And just around, the border, you've got our neighboring countries like Zimbabwe, for instance, where you find situations that they don't allow where GMO production of maize or wheat. Now, those constraints, when at times you find some of our neighboring countries that rely on us, we are sustainable in South Africa, but you'll find out in some of these countries, in terms of food security, they are still more in food insecure. And now the issues of trade now in ensuring that we move the commodities from South Africa to these countries, you find that they will have to lift the ban on GM commodities. Similarly, also on the animal livestock, it is very difficult to export eggs from South Africa to Angola. They put a tariff of 30%, for instance. So even to export, eggs just from South Africa to Botswana, it's also a challenge. And if you look also into our geographical location or suitability in South Africa, we are very closer to the Kruger National Parks, So the issues of the FMD, foot and mouth disease, which actually gives the status to our cattle, it also creates a situation where you find it becomes strenuous to sort of export even beef animals to just around our neighbors, like Botswana, Swaziland. And then these are the key issues that we find that are very unique for South Africa. It's the issues of the disease themselves. It's the issues of the adoption of technology within the region. Most or probably majority of the countries within the region, they're still a bit of in terms of adopting technology, a bit moving at a slow pace, and that also creates a sort of a situation for South Africa not to be able to sort of tap into this market. For instance, if you're in South Africa, you can't even send even your wheat to Zambia. They are only GMO free. And if you again look at how South Africa agricultural sector functions, early in the 1990s, we moved from the former control boards where we're in a free sort of market economy as in line with the WTO as a member within the WTO. Now, within the region, most of the countries are more of government using the system of control boards. The government is the sort of a big player in terms of trade issues, moving of agricultural commodities, whilst in our side it's the producers, it's the farmers and the agri entrepreneurs and agro processing companies that deal with business and agriculture. Government only does sort of the policy environment, ensuring that the fields are clear for, well leveled for the producers. So these are the key challenges. Not to say, as Africa, we've got the potential to sort of meet all the 3 or 4 pillars of food security. However, the key challenge has been the policy environment in terms of trade measures and the trade barriers. They sort of disadvantage movement of commodities from one area to another. Issues of infrastructure, it becomes very difficult, to also even on road or railways to transport commodities from South Africa to anywhere within the region. The infrastructure is highly depleted over the years. There's no much of sort of investment going through to the infrastructure. We in South Africa we are fortunate to have government that has been able to listen to the private sector, work hand in hand with the farmers. We have developed a strategy recently. Probably Chris is familiar with it, the agricultural master plans. Now, from these master plans, what we foresee a change within the system itself locally within South Africa. As I've mentioned, we've got two existing systems, the commercial and the smallholder farmers. So we want to have one unified agricultural sector in South Africa. And also we want to sort of work with government so that government does play its role in the issue of the policy environment, ensuring that it becomes easier to trade within the regions, be it SADC or SACU or anywhere here in Africa. So those are my few words, Andrew, in this discussions. I'll welcome any questions as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amongile. Thank you for this. Next is Christo van der Riede. Christo is the Executive Director of Agri South Africa, where he plays an active role in presenting, promoting, and protecting the interests of the agricultural sector in South Africa. He also serves on the Black Economic Empowerment Charter Council and on various other agricultural, ministerial, and governmental platforms. Christo, we see that the role of the government has emerged as a key theme here. We heard about an output-focused discussion that we need to have. We heard about investment needed, trade barriers, policy ambiguity, a different policy mix that's needed for Africa compared to Europe. I would like to ask you, how do you see these things from a policy perspective? Is the current policy environment conducive to the sustainable development of South Africa? And as we approach the EU-Africa summit, what would you like to see considered from a South African perspective? What is the message? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think what is very, very important is that governments all over the world and UN people that sits throughout all of those international institutions, that they need to realize it is not land that produces food, it's expertise. And if we do not build that expertise over time, if we do not protect that expertise, if we do not advance the interest of that expertise, then it means your country is going to run into serious, serious trouble. You cannot just take somebody from the street and say, right, tomorrow you start farming. Or you cannot just give a person a piece of land and then expect that person to start farming. Farming nowadays is highly technologically advanced, scientific-based, because of the many, many challenges that farmers face. And yes, farmers are almost like heart surgeons. Not everyone, a lot of people can become doctors, not everyone an heart surgeon. And I think that's the kind of thinking that we need to promote throughout the world and throughout all of those institutions that are party to agriculture. The next big issue that is going to confront agriculture is biosecurity. We've seen how this pandemic that had a major impact on humans, the way we live and the way we interact. But we've seen more and more biosecurity issues within the agriculture sector as well. Major outbreaks of foot and mouth in South Africa, Rift Valley fever, avian flu all over the world, and it brings an entire commodity sector to a standstill. And I think that we need to prioritize. And it goes with what I've said right at the start. It's expertise that produces food. And if your farmers are experts, and I'm not saying they should be scientists in terms of all of these biosecurity issues, but if they understand it, if they know exactly what to do, if there's an outbreak of a certain disease on their farms, then you, at the end of the day, protect a specific sector, you protect the industry at large. Because if that expertise lacks, what happens? The farmer doesn't know there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. You find a situation where that disease now spreads to other areas, and whoops, there you sit with a massive dilemma. Then the third issue is, and I think this is where governments play a massive role, infrastructure. You've seen all over Africa, you've got the best land available. I always say you can plant a topple, it will start producing pears the next day or apples. But it's no use. You've got all that fertile land and you cannot transport your goods from one point to the other point, or you cannot export it to the rest of the world. So infrastructure is of critical importance. In South Africa, we are now busy with an infrastructure bill. Yesterday, we've had quite an extensive meeting on what should be done in terms of road infrastructure, harbor infrastructure, water-related infrastructure, such as dams, canals, pipelines, and stuff like that. I always say water is not the problem. It's water management that is the problem, especially in the South African context. Then logistics. We've seen the nightmare this pandemic has caused with logistics. All over the world, suddenly there was a shortage of reefer containers, shortage of boats. There was some guys that turned their boat sideways in the Suez Canal, and that impacted on the rest of the world. So how do we make sure that we've got an up and running logistics system? And we need to be very careful not to monopolize logistics systems. And why I'm saying that is that if there's a crisis in a harbor in Singapore or somewhere in China, that means that you cannot move your reefer containers to other parts of the world. So, and I think we have to rethink in terms of how do we ensure that our logistics system at the end of the day is not, and I put this in brackets, not held hostage by monopolized areas where things are heaped up and then you cannot move it. Another thing is wastage. Wastage is a massive problem all over the world. And it's due to our cold chain system that is not optimized, not working properly. How do we then bring that into play as well? And we need to have a policy environment that, or a policy in terms of dealing with wastage. And then we need to come down on people that deliberately leave food to rot and so forth. The other issue is fair trade. We've seen in South Africa how our own industry has suffered as a result of dumping. And we need to address that, because you cannot have a situation where your bigger and more commercialized countries, at the end of the day, just take it for granted that they can bring in stuff and destroy your entire industry as such. Issue of financing. Financing is becoming scarcer, it becomes more expensive. How do we ensure that we make funding available to agricultural practices and farmers and entities, but also to other support instruments, for example, to advance certain technologies or to build certain technologies to get more scientific research going within the agriculture sector. And then you cannot divorce agriculture from rural development. It is no use. And that's the dilemma that we have in South Africa. In fact, I've just spoken to a whole group of farmers earlier today that you cannot have islands of wealth in a sea of poverty. And how do we then, as a farming sector, contribute towards rural development, creating better quality jobs? And yes, you cannot expect farmers to pay farm workers massive salaries. That will never happen. But it's about human dignity. And if we don't deal with the issue of human dignity, if we don't deal with the socio-economic environment in which workers find themselves and the lack of opportunities they're in, then your farmer, who they perceive as wealthy, then becomes the target. And then last but not least, we need to focus on growing ownership. Countries that focus on transferring ownership of land to people are much more wealthier than those because that lacks or that's not committed to advance ownership of land. And we've seen in many countries, the issue of collateral is closely linked to ownership. And if you don't deal with it, etc. Then farmer support, technical, extension services, and so forth. And then something that I want to end off. If we do not have a balance between the environment, the natural environment, and farming, then we're going to leave a legacy behind that our children will blame us forever. We've seen in the Amazon areas, we've seen in parts of Africa how the natural environment is completely destroyed, and we don't put an alternative in place. If Africa loses its natural fauna and flora, you can just imagine the massive impact it will have on other industries, such as tourism, etc., and ultimately on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Christo. Many thoughts to reflect on. Up next is St. Francis Public Affairs Director for East Southern Africa region at Nestlé South Africa. St. Francis, thank you very much for being on the panel and for your patience. How can we make our supply chains more sustainable, and what are some of the barriers we need to have removed? Do you see a big potential in the African continental trade area? That's one of the key questions I would like you to ask. And are you concerned about the barriers to trade resonating from the EU? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Andrianis. Good afternoon and good evening, and potentially good morning to everyone joining. It's a very loaded question, very multi-pronged, so I'm going to try answer it as comprehensively as I can, but also at the same time being succinct in the interest of time. So I'm obviously going to be answering the questions, and my participation here is really from the vantage point of coming from a different perspective and angle within the food system, being a food manufacturer. I think the first thing to perhaps really state is that, food systems at the heart of the Nestlé business, as the #1 food and beverage company in the world, not only as a key player in the global food systems, being a manufacturer and a producer, but we have a very vested interest in the entire value chain, as that is really determined on our success as an organization. Our purpose as Nestlé is to unlock the power of food to enhance the quality of life for generations to come. Now, in order for us to unlock the power of food to, one, enhance the quality of life and for generations to come, it really is a no-brainer that we need healthy, robust and sustainable food systems, as many of the co-panelists have already highlighted. And that kind of brings me back to the question that you've posed, well, the first part of the question, which is around how do we make supply chains more sustainable? I think, again, I'm not going to belabor the points that have already been made with the increase in food production and this expanded need for, supply of quality raw materials. There are many challenges that confront this dire need that we're seeing develop. And of course, with food chains being quite complex, right? You've got agri-processing, you've got producers and aggregators. You also then have, a bit downstream, which, involves the wholesalers and the retailers. And there, within this complexity, I think the focus might be perhaps not obvious for some, but from a Nestlé perspective and also on a personal perspective, where we need to focus our energy and where perhaps some of the challenges, as highlighted, are mostly encountered in the upstream. And so in order for us to keep this food system really working, in order for us to ensure the reliable supply of raw materials for food production, we definitely need to focus our actions and interventions on influencing the primary production. And I think this is underpinned by the UN's Global Compact on supply chain sustainability, which essentially highlights 3 areas, the environment, social responsibility, and economic viability. And, I'd love to give an example in terms of what does that look like, what types of actions. So Jerome has already, shared examples from SYNGENTA, but just last week as Nestlé, we launched our Generation Regeneration, which ultimately outlines our plan to support and to accelerate the transition to a regenerative food system. And really, it's all about moving from this premise of not doing harm to restoring and being a lot more regenerative through our business. We work with 500,000 farmers, I beg your pardon, through our Farmer Connect program. And here we focus on, access to markets. We do training on farm economics. And these are farmers that are within our own agricultural supply chain. So really focusing on getting our farmers to also adopt regenerative agriculture practices, and also, adopting more environmentally sustainable farming practices. In South Africa, we are working on a pilot project, which is the first net zero as dairy farm, which essentially would be one of the first dairy farms, not only in Africa, and this is a bit contentious whether it would be the first in the world, where again, we're looking to create a dairy farm operations that is essentially net zero. And we're focusing on soil work, we're focusing on manure processing, we're focusing on water conservation, and also the feed management of the dairy operation. So again, there are actions which are really focused on the primary production of raw materials within the agricultural space. And of course, with climate change being such a primary a threat to the agricultural supply chains, but also the agricultural sector, as Nestle, we're also making very strong commitments around our greenhouse gas emissions, where essentially by 2025 we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. We then want to move to be net zero no later than 2050 and halving our emissions by 2030 as well. And in order for us to fully realize this, we have made a contribution and a commitment of 1.2 billion Swiss francs for that matter, to really kind of spark regenerative agriculture across the company supply chain, where by 2030 we're looking to source 14 million tons of our ingredients through regenerative agriculture. Now, back to the question on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. I don't think that this is going to be the magic bullet that solves the issues. I think we heard from Dr. Abongile in terms of some of the barriers that we encounter, so the movement of goods, the harmonization, and a lot of the barriers are non-tariff barriers, so NTBs. And so when we look at the premise of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, in many ways, I think what we often lose sight of is the fact that the agreement in itself is not going to necessarily supersede or override the existing trade agreements within the regional economic communities, the likes of SADC, ECOWAS, EAC, and COMESA. So in many ways, I think where the solution is really addressing the non-tariff barriers within the regional economic communities, because as we know, the Continental Free Trade Agreement in itself is quite a long journey ahead. This is Vision 2063. So in terms of fully realizing the benefits of that, it's not going to be overnight, and therefore I think we need to be focusing on harmonization of standards across African markets, food markets particularly, and agricultural supply chains, to ensure that movement of product, movement of goods, movement of raw materials, and standardizing quality standards, etc., so that we can facilitate the intra-Africa trade, and particularly I think focusing on the regional economic communities to address these non-tariff barriers. So very long-winded answer, but essentially I think on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, that is really the stance. And just to then recap, I think the action really needs to be on the primary production, regenerative agriculture, and particularly focusing on the environment, social responsibility, and also then economic viability as well.
Thank you very much, Sam Francis. I definitely have more questions than I thought I would, but I would like to stay on trade and get back to you, Jerome. What role does trade play in this, and what role does trade play in achieving sustainable development at scale? Is there a one-size-fits-all policy, a global policy that can work?
Well, actually, there is a dream of a one-size-fits-all, but it's only a dream, as we heard very well from St. Francis, right? I mean, the very long-term 2063 ambition for a continental free trade area. But I believe the regional trading groups are one thing, but they can be compatible with the long-term ambition, right? So I wouldn't say it's either or. Pretty much as when we discussed about innovation, sustainability versus intensity with Lulama, we said it's not it's not either or, it's both. I think it is both. But I believe a number we need to come back to again is this the importation of food in Africa. If you think of Africa, Africa imports 60% of what is eaten in Africa, right? Whereas Africa has 60% of the global arable land, right? So there is something wrong. And yes, the growth of food production will not come from more arable land, put into production. It needs to be coming primarily from more intensification, right? But as was already explained. So I think it is key. But to make sure this happens, we need to remove barriers to trade. Sustainability and growth will come from becoming richer and wealthier, not poorer, right? I mean, that's obvious. And that's where trade plays a role. And two perspectives on trade. The first one is global trade, making sure that effectively African farmers, African producers are not prevented from accessing the bigger markets. And we mentioned European Union several times. Nestle made very nice comments on the importance of regenerative agriculture and uplifting the way food is produced in Africa. But this is happening. And when this happens, we need to make sure that the European Union and other global or other regional areas and markets don't use let's say, extremely forward-looking ways of producing food as standards, right? And as effectively protectionist measures. We need to make sure that these groups don't organize themselves to prevent the farmers, African farmers, from benefiting from trade. So that's the first one. But the other one, of course, is intra-continental trade, as was very well explained by St. Francis again. The potential of intra-African trade is massive, right? Making sure that effectively the non-tariff barriers are lifted, that the regulatory framework is harmonized. In our case, when we talk about technologies, we harmonize on risk-based standards. The registration and licensing systems across Africa are more and more harmonized. And this can be done quickly at the continental level, not only in the case of food production, at least agriculture standards. It doesn't need to be primarily in the regional committees and the regional groups, I believe. One final word, maybe if you allow me, this is around the importation of food. I said 60% of food is imported. I think the numbers that I read around sub-Saharan Africa is that more than $40 billion is spent today in sub-Saharan Africa in importing food. If you just think of what would happen if part of this 40 billion, instead of being spent on importing food into Africa, were used into investing in better education for farmers. We mentioned logistics, right? Better infrastructure and removing trade and barriers to trade, basically enabling free trade and delivering free trade for the benefit of Africa, starting with African farmers. That would be a major change, and this can happen. We know how to get there. We need to get there together.
Thank you, Jerome. And Lulama, I would like to pick your brain on pretty much the same issue. What role does intra-African trade play in sustainable development? How can we make sure that intra-African trade is sustainable and that it also promotes sustainability? You have 2 minutes. If we could,
Sure.
give your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yes, no, 100%. Well, right, in theory, trade is pivotal, right? One of the basic tenets of our neoclassical thinking is that we gain through trade, right? And this arises due to specialization. So as countries specialize in the production of goods and services for which they have comparative advantage, right, through trade, we can achieve this welfare enhancing gains. This is our theory, right? And so in terms of sustainability, then this implies that countries don't need to focus all their productive resources in building just self-sufficiency. Rather, they can think about that natural resource base, focus it on producing everything. So self-sufficiency isn't the answer. Rather, focus their natural resource base on producing the products for which their natural resources is best equipped to produce. And then through trade, we release that pressure on our productive resources. So that's my intervention. I'm trying to keep it short here.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for that. Abongile, I want to stay on the African Continental Free Trade Area issue, and I would like to ask you, what do you believe that the African Continental Free Trade Area, what role can it play, and how can it help improve trade and food markets in Africa? Thank you.
No, thanks, Andrians. I'm sorry, I've been reminded to switch on the camera. I was not even aware that I have to put it on the whole time.
No worries.
Yeah. Now, so if you look at this sort of an agreement, for me, it's a long-term sort of a plan, which we foresee if it's well implemented, it will probably change the landscape of agriculture within the region. So for me, the scope of this agreement or plan is too large. The agreement, yes, if countries were to implement it according to its objectives, it will probably reduce the tariffs issues among the countries and cover the policy areas such as the trade facilitation and services, as well as the regulatory measures, especially on issues of sanitary standards, issues of biosecurity, issues of technical barriers to trade. So these are the things that will probably come from this plan in the near future. But again, as we have seen, the COVID-19 has confronted most of us in the world, unplanned for that matter. So for me, in the short term, if we were to look at this plan properly, it could probably assist to cushion the negative effects that have been felt from this COVID-19, especially on the economic growth side, by supporting the regional trade and ensuring that the value chain through the region have reduced trade cost. And then if you look into the long term of this plan, if also it's well implemented and adopted by the member states, it will allow countries to anchor expectations by providing the integration and the growth of ensuring that it enhances the reforms. And furthermore, from this pandemic, it is demonstrated that there is a need to increase cooperation among trade partners by ensuring that at least movement of food, for instance, during we had some lockdowns in South Africa when the COVID-19 started. So even movement of food from one state or province was an issue. I mean, it was not much of an issue because those were regarded as essential services. So there was a good flow of commodities from one province to another, and would wish to see that also happening at the sort of a country level or at the regional level, where we are confronted by pandemics like COVID, but we allow that dispensation for the movement of food from one country to another, and ensure that trade does move or flow smoothly. Those are my few last comments, Andriana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abongile. And Christo, I want to move to you next. And Abongile here raised a very important issue, the effect of COVID-19. And I would like to ask you, how can we recover from that effect? How can we build stronger food systems going forward that will be more resilient? Again, if you could stick to 2 minutes, that would be ideal, as I'm fully aware of the time.
Perhaps just coming back to South Africa, what we've done in South Africa was we declared agriculture as an essential service next to health. And that, to a very large extent, enabled our farmers to continue producing food. Yes, they were confronted with this pandemic, and there were areas, there were outbreaks and so forth. But with the necessary health protocols, they could overcome that. And I think that's critical, that there's a realization within the agriculture sector that this pandemic is real, that you need to have a solid vaccination program. You need to make sure that you abide to all health protocols. But at the same time, you need to forge new relationships, to think anew. There's a massive explosion of virtual markets, for example, in South Africa. So that's new ideas and new concepts in terms of how to get food to specific areas. So yeah, I think with new thinking, these issues that we faced during the pandemic is not insurmountable.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And St. Francis, I have a question that goes back to what you mentioned on EU-Africa cooperation. And the EU-Africa Summit is due to take place early next year. And we've been discussing the areas of partnership that will be agreed on. And the EU has been outlining its Green Deal vision for Africa, which favors organic agricultural production. What are the factors that you believe need to be considered in the agreement that comes out of the summit? And how can we make sure that this agreement benefits Africa as much as it benefits Europe? Thank you.
Thanks, Andrianis. I'll try to keep it brief. So I think principally the AU member states have to go into the discussion with an eye-level partnership in mind. It cannot be an extractive partnership, and I think the focus from both the EU and AU member states needs to be on, the greatest co-benefits in terms of job creation and growth. So I think that really needs to be one of the key considerations, particularly from an Africa perspective or an AU member state perspective, where it's really around, the co-benefits and particularly focusing on job creation and growth. The EU is very clear in terms of what their priorities are through their Green Deal, and I think in turn AU member states again will need to probably invest a bit more time in defining what are the strategic objectives. Particularly, I think the focus needs to be on how do we promote socially inclusive, green transitions across the continent, and then how are we cooperating with the EU on those green transitions. So I think again we need to be a lot clearer and really very, very focused in terms of what those strategic objectives need to be. Again, I think, and this is perhaps a bit controversial, but I think, Africa needs to go in with, essentially looking at where are some of the, bargaining leverage that they have. So if you consider that the EU has, historically been responsible for more emissions per capita than Africa. But again, the consequences and the impact will probably be most felt in Africa. So again, that's something that needs to be addressed. And in these solutions, I think that's a point in which, AU member states can really, really find bargaining power and leveraging. So for me, the movement need not be, or the focus need not be just so much on financing, investment. I think that is an important part of the conversation, and no way am I downplaying that. And of course, looking to the EU for investment and financing deals, etc. But I think where we need to, again, from an Africa perspective, and the key consideration has to be on things such as renewable energy. I mean, this is key to the growth of Africa. And again, it needs to be around how do we facilitate renewable energy development. And again, not so much from the perspective of financing, but how do we focus on technology transfer from EU member states and the EU in itself? How do we build capacity so that we can be self-sufficient in some of the solutions going forward, with, of course, cooperation and collaboration with the EU at the center of that? So we have to go in there with an eye-level partnership in mind. We have to go in there being very clear on what it is that AU member states and the AU and Africa in particular would like to get out of the EU and Africa Green Deal.
Thanks very much, St. Francis. And I'm aware we're entering the last 10 minutes of our discussion, and I would hate to cut this short without giving all of you the opportunity to summarize your thoughts. So I would like to give each one of you 2 minutes to tell us if there will be a single message that you would like our audience to take away today. What would that be? And St. Francis, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you. So I think I've landed my primary message, and I think we've heard from the various speakers talking about some of the challenges, talking about the opportunities. I think the opportunity really, if we talk about sustainable food systems, if we talk about a robust, resilient food system and supply chains, we have to then focus on primary production. We have to rethink strategies, the support in which, and on many different levels, government, businesses. How do we facilitate? How do we support the agriculture sector? How do we support agribusiness? And how do we support and encourage agripreneurship? And within that, I think what is also fundamental in primarily focusing on primary production is really seeding, as guided by the UN Global Compact on supply chain sustainability, is these 3 key areas of the environment. So this is where I think regenerative agriculture, sustainable farming practices come into play. Social responsibility, how do we make sure that the farmers themselves, which play a very, very important role in food systems. In fact, I think they're probably the most important player in the sustainability of our food systems. How do we make sure that they are educated, empowered to essentially farm with the future in mind? And then, this economic viability is also a very important one. So fair trade and giving them access to markets and opening up markets as well. So I think that is my key message, focusing on the farmers' primary production as probably the key intervention area for the sustainable future of our food systems.
Thanks very much. Christo, many people look up to the governmental sector. What's your final thought?
I think we need to, I think it will be naive for me to say you must remove politics out of the sphere. It will never happen. But I think there's a lot of influencing work, advocacy work that organized agriculture have to bring about. Our understanding of the political space, of the geopolitical space, is of critical importance. And that's why within organized agriculture, yes, you've got your specialists that focus on the technological side, on the scientific side, the research side, and so forth. But you will have to have a very strong arm that can influence the political narrative out there. And that's the only way you can going to convince politicians to think differently about agriculture, because they think that you can just dish out land, or you can place all kinds of inhibitors in the space of agriculture, and things will happen. Unfortunately, it comes back to the farmer on the ground. That farmer needs to be empowered so that we can feed the rest of the world.
Thank you, Christo. Abongile, your final thoughts.
Thanks, Andreas. Look, when I look at the potential of Africa, there's a lot of potential for this continent to feed its nations. The key issue is it goes back to the primary agriculture, the support that the primary agriculture is seeking for. Now, if we also look at the issue of the food security, if it becomes, aligned with government plans and becomes the priority of government to say we have to put a stance as government. We need to make sure that we feed our population. And then these are the resources that as government would give to the farmers. It will enable, the producers and give them that opportunity to continue producing for the population. Now, the fortunate part with us in South Africa is that I've indicated earlier, we have this sort of a relationship that we've built over years between the private agriculture or commercial agriculture with government. We are busy now trying to get a strategy for the sector through the agricultural master plans, which we believe will probably solve some of our issues as an agricultural sector. We don't believe there's one size fits all solution. It has to be a number of issues and a number of collaborations to bring all these resources together to ensure that agriculture continues to play its role, that is to feed the nation and also to make sure it contributes to the general agricultural productivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abongile. Lulama, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll be honest, as the conversation evolved, I changed my closing point. And in listening to the other speakers, Jerome, St. Francis, Abongile, Christo, what struck me was that the private sector really is leading the charge in building sustainable, resilient food systems on the continent. And so that I asked myself, well, what's the role of government? And we all know, right? Create an enabling environment. Now, I'm going to take it a step further and challenge our policymakers to say, listen, we've got great policies on the books. Let's move towards implementation and let's get out of the way of the private sector so we can build a sustainable, resilient food system. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jerome, you have the final word. We started with industry, we concluded with industry.
Well, I hesitate because the previous ones and the last one in particular was just fantastic, right? Well, this is
absolutely.
This sums it all. So let me try to repeat that, but with my words, right? I mean, Kofi Annan said farmers, agriculture is a key part of the solution. This is not a problem. So I believe we have it all. The good news is we have the tools and we know they work. So let's use science and innovation to accelerate our path to achieving sustainable development. We are doing it. Let's keep doing it. And let's partner for impact in the food value chain. We do that together. Let's help signal to the policymakers how to effectively implement and effectively create the enabling policy environment, harmonized frameworks we need, the right ones. But also trade. I mean, coming back to trade, the communities, the farmers need to be prosperous. I mean, I can confirm agriculture can be prosperous. If you let it produce, they will become prosperous, more sustainable, and they will find the solutions and they will bring the solutions. So let's have this collective action on agri-food trade. Let's remove the barriers to prosperity and empower the farmers to deliver, right? Because they will surprise us. They will surprise us and make it happen. Feed Africa, feed the world more sustainably. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And that brings our discussion to a close. Very, very thankful to our speakers and all of you who joined from a European perspective, where I come from here in Brussels. This is exactly the type of discussions and questions you have to be looking at so we can deliver an agreement that's mutually beneficial, both to the EU, to Europe, but also Africa as well. Thank you very much all for tuning in, and I'll be happy to carry on such conversations in African or European forums, and have a good day, all of you. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was the Sustainable Food Security Seminar facilitated by Adrianos Giano, Public Affairs Manager at Euroactive, all the way in Brussels. Thank you very much to you and your panelists.